Hello, and welcome to our first Learning from Home webinar hosted by Michigan Virtual. I'm Stacey Schuh, and in today's session, I will lead us through a conversation with 3 educators from around the state of Michigan. During this conversation, we will discuss meeting the basic needs of students as it relates to teaching and learning in the remote or virtual learning environment. So before we dive into our topic for today, I just want to be sure to let everyone know we have a series of these recorded webinars on our Learning Continuity page, which is available on the Michigan Virtual website. And these webinars are all free, and I encourage you to visit the webpage listed below to explore the other topics we discussed related to learning continuity. We have an amazing group of educators joining us today, so let's meet them. Melissa Usiak is the Executive Director of Michigan ASCD. Brian Call is the Senior Instructor for Michigan Virtual. And Dina Rocheleau is the Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction for Ferndale Public Schools. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
So to kick us off, the first question I have for you is, during this time when there are so many educators and students learning from home and working from home, what does educating the whole child mean to you?
I guess I'll field this one first. To me, in addition to providing assistance with their learning content at home for science, history, and those things, I also think that's important to teach the child as a whole, focusing on things like mental health, their physical health. And right now, in this time of uncertainty, it's also to really teach them about social awareness and teach them about what's going on right now with the virus and things of that nature.
I'll step in as well. This is Dina Rocheleau from Ferndale. Thank you for having me on. I think when we're thinking about educating the whole child, when you think about the tenets that come with the whole child, they start with safe and healthy, or healthy and safe. And I don't think that's, I know that's intentional, because in this time of our life, we need to really ensure that the health of our children comes first. The safety of our children comes first. And that's how do we connect children with their families, connect them with their friends, especially when they're at home. The third tenet of the whole child is talking about being engaged. And this is a gift of time when you're at home that you can think about learning in many different ways. There's not a right or wrong way. And we want families to know, when you're at home with your child, think of ways that you can provide choice and novelty. And then the other 2 tenets are about being supportive. And like Ryan said, right now, we really need to keep that at the core of all we do. And that, how do we support children who their world is very differently. So I think as adults, it's really important for us to focus on this gift of time and try to view it in the eyes of a child. And I think that will really help us. And there's a lot of research out there that says that emotional intelligence is actually just as, or maybe even a little bit more important than the IQ. And so as educators and advocates, we have to lift that up now and share that message with families.
Now you know why I waited for Dina to go. So Dina is one of the school leaders from our most recent Whole Child Award that Michigan ASCD in cooperation with MEMSPA and the Michigan Assessment Consortium just awarded this fall. And you can see why, just based on how she spoke so eloquently to those tenets of the WISC model, which really embraces the whole child approach. And so I want to echo everything that Ryan and Dina said, as far as just being really attentive to all those aspects that make up our little and our big, human beings, students, children, while they are trying to find their way and make their way through, this new space of learning while they are at home. And I think it's important to continue to help our families understand that, but also to help support our leaders and educators and how they can in turn do that from a distance in this continuous way. And that's going to be a challenge. So more than ever, I think we're priming ourselves to embrace this this whole child approach and the use of the WISC model and framework in order to really serve, our children in a holistic way.
So Melissa, you mentioned the WISC model. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what it is?
Sure. So the CDC, who is getting all sorts of attention now as one of our leaders in this crisis, they, along with ASCD, which is the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, an international organization, professional organization for educators, that really promotes leadership around teaching and learning. They developed a framework to think about how to serve the whole child many years ago, and our own state of Michigan will be asking us as schools to use that framework to work from and around through our continuous improvement efforts in the future. So now more than ever, we're seeing lots of demonstrations of people working in and throughout the framework, which is really exciting. And I hope that we have some pause when we are through some of this so that we can reflect on how well we did, because I see all sorts of examples and modeling of this without people, I think, even being aware of it. And that's a really encouraging thing, and one of the things that continues to motivate me to talk about and make the connections between what I'm seeing happening right now and this framework that we're going to be asked to use more often in Michigan.
So in listening to your conversation, you really talk about building relationships and thinking beyond academics here, but to what all children need. So in thinking about the situation we're currently in, how do you suggest educators support students during these trying times? Where can they start?
I think in the beginning, it's easy to get overwhelmed with everything going on. But I think just starting off with something small and little to just get used to it and get in the flow of it. For example, if you're teaching a subject on science or history, you can always start with something small, like going onto YouTube and finding a video about a famous artist or painter, and then develop some like guided questions or focus questions and provide the students with them to think about when they're doing the video or reading the material, to just get them started and engaged with this whole concept of learning at home. And then from there, instructors or teachers can build on from there and develop more content and use different resources. I think the difficult part is just getting started. And then once you really get started into it, a lot of ideas and practices will just automatically just pop up in your head. You'll start thinking of like, oh, how could I use this or that to help my students learn during this time? And I think a good place to start actually would be to look into Michigan Virtual's website. On there, we have a lot of free resources to help parents and schools help their teachers learn from home.
And I'll piggyback on what Ryan said. Really, really important that there's a less is more, right? We can still do so much when we're still in a mind frame that less is more. And there's so many ways to have projects at home that focus on science, social studies, reading and writing that you can do together and chunk your time together. A few things that I think it's important to suggest to our educators right now is to remember that our response as the adult and our adult mindset is usually more impactful than the trying times themselves. And so as the adults, we have to continue to have composure and be very supportive in our role with families who are going through a lot of hard times and our children and our students. And that's very, very important to think about. I also think that we have to be clear about language and streamline our communication. In Ferndale, one of the expectations that we're asking is that we have a consistent message, and that consistent message always starts with caring and social emotional learning and what can we do to support you at this time, right? One of my favorite sayings that I share all the time is that cognitive function is built on emotional platforms. And so when Melissa and I were talking about the tenets of healthy, safe, engaged, and supportive, when those come together, you can do more challenge. Just like Ryan was saying, when we have the relationships, then comes the rigor. A few other things that I think that as educators, we need to leverage right now when it comes to behavior at home. We need to remember that success and difficulties or success and concerns should not equate to rewards and consequences or rewards and punishments right now. That we need to be composed and to have supports in place to help children and not try to reward them for trying something differently. I think that's really, really important. We usually respond to behavior and difficulties as good or bad. And right now, there are children and families that are going through trauma and even toxic stress. And so when a child is having a meltdown, think of it in a way that they're having stress or anxiety. And that will help you as an educator or parent think differently in the words that you might use. And I think that's very, very important right now. Have lots and lots right now. Also, I think one of the nice things to think about right now, children are probably doing okay. But as we continue through this trying time, they might brake check you, right? And when you go to rent a car, you get in there and you check the brakes, you check everything to see if it's just right. And our children are going to start doing that soon. And so again, going back to that adult mindset, what will we do in response to the child? So a couple of key words that I think all parents need to know about is how do we respond and not react? And using words such as helpful and hurtful, safe and unsafe, those are key things that are really important. Another thing to think about, another word is to use the word pause instead of stop, and you'll see a much different response from your children. I can go on, but I think right now, let's think about our children's social, emotional, and mental health and how we can support that right now.
And when I think about educators currently, I think first of all, we should be sharing a lot of grace and really being patient with ourselves as well as each other and our families and our students as people acclimate. I think one of the most important things that I've done a lot of reading on what other states have been doing to try to support continuous learning from a distance. And I agree, I've read a lot about less is more. So starting out small and being gracious with yourself, to start out small and easy, as Ryan was saying. But I think the two biggest messages for leaders and educators are to communicate and to connect. And I think even if your small is connecting or doing your very best to connect with every family in some regular way, whether that be by phone or by mail or virtually, it's our classroom teachers that know our students the best and have those relationships that Dina was talking about. They know what families can do, and I think connecting them and supporting them in a very individual way is going to be really important, because that's how we reach out to the whole child in our classroom too, is on a very individual way. And I think that has to be as consistent with families as possible. But communication and connection are huge right now, and show grace and start small.
So Melissa, you mentioned communication and connection. Can any of you give me an example of a way that you might connect with students during this time that might be helpful to them thinking about their needs?
One thing that I do actually, excuse me, is, and teachers might not have it at home, but there's programs like Zoom or FaceTime or Skype or any of those. What you do is set up open office hours. And I did this actually this week for 2 days. I let my students and parents know that I have essentially open office hours. So at any time between, a block of time, students will come in, just pop in my Zoom room and talk to me, and I can provide them with assistance. On Tuesday, I had a student in my AP class who needed help with writing one of her essays and had some questions about a test. So she just joined my Zoom room, came in, and I worked with her one-on-one. Another student was just wanted to talk. It's getting kind of people are isolated at home and need some interaction. And I even encourage students to do that. I posted on my class website, hey, if you're bored and just want to talk or need somebody to talk to, just jump in and talk to me. So I did have one student who jumped on and talked to me. My students know that I was in the military, and this particular student was interested in going into the Air Force. So he just popped on my Zoom room and was asking me questions about the military. So it's really a great way to connect and reach out to students when you can meet with them virtually, kind of like what we're doing now.
One of the things that I agree with what Ryan was saying, and there's one-way communication and there's two-way communication, and your district has policies around that you need to be mindful of as an educator. But in Ferndale, our elementary principals, every Monday, they are sending out a communication to families, and it provides them with information on different books that they can watch online, and YouTube videos that our teachers have done with specific books that align with our curriculum. And those little messages are very important. Our school superintendent, Dr. Bazzi, sends also home every Monday is a staff check-in. It's a Google form, and we're just asking, how are you doing? Are you getting stir crazy? What's something new you've tried this week? And check in with our staff, because compassion fatigue and all of this is really affecting us as well. And then with our families, we're connecting with them through that same form. Last week, or yesterday, it seems like last week, doesn't it? We had over 600 families respond to our Google form and just checking in. We're doing okay. We're getting a little stir crazy. Here are my questions that I'm wondering about. I do need a little support with food. And so those check-ins are important, not only for content, but for that, just like Melissa said, pure connection and attachment. As we move forward and we are out of school for the remainder of the year, in the district, we have elementary expectations and secondary expectations for our staff, and they're tiered, just like if we were in the classroom. And so for tier 1, these are our expectations on how to connect to your students. And then tier 2, here's the expectation to connect to specific students to ensure that they're doing okay. And so all of the districts have so many things up in their head and what they're doing to support children. It'll be very good.
And I would say start with whatever platforms are familiar, and try not to tackle too much newness. So if you are used to calling your parents or texting your parents, I say start there. And don't get overwhelmed with trying to tackle a new technology or a new platform. If postcards are your means, I mean, who doesn't love to get a postcard, or a letter in the mail? And children are the same, no matter what their age are, and families as well. So I think that's one thing I really want to encourage is people to use whatever platforms they already have in place. If they're used to using Google and, as a platform, use your Google Hangout, use your Google Documents, use your Google Drive. If you're used to recording lessons, on YouTube, use your YouTube. And so I think that's something I want to help promote is use the tools that are already familiar to your school or your district, to your classroom, and start there.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Melissa. With the way things are, everybody's kind of a little overwhelmed right now. So there's no need to add additional stress or overwhelm yourself more by trying something new. So I think you make an excellent point of just, going to your go-to idea of how to communicate. That's a point.
Thank you all. So I know that we kind of touched on this a little bit already, and we talked about using Zoom, and Melissa, you mentioned the sending notes through the mail, which is actually kind of funny because I have a note from my child's kindergarten teacher right here next to me, and my daughter Charlie was so super excited to get that, and it made her feel connected. So I guess when you think about us being in this new virtual environment, we've talked a lot about communicating with students. Would you have any tips for communicating with parents, or how parents can help students to stay engaged during this time?
I would say, again, go back to whatever you're used to. And like Dina was saying, it's two-way communication. Sometimes I think we pride ourselves too quickly in schools for our one-way communication. What we really want to do is make sure we understand our families and we're doing something that's comfortable to them. And so go back to what you're used to. If it is those phone calls, if it is emails, and I think continuing to let people know you care about them and you're checking in on their health and well-being, that's really important for those relationships. Giving time and space to talk about what's going well, what isn't going well. As Dina was saying, what are your questions? How are things going? Like those continue to sustain relationships and build relationships even from a distance. So giving that opportunity to talk about what's going well, but also what isn't going well, and using that as a chance to actively listen and be empathetic and just human, right? Just humanize that situation as much as possible. And I think building a relationship virtually can be done. Some people don't feel like it can be, but I think you have to just be really attentive to those things.
Yeah, I think it's extremely important when you're trying to build connections with the parents and the students, is to, in fact, let them know that you're there for them. We're here, we're in the same situation, we're here to support them. And I always think it's extremely helpful that when you're communicating with them, that you share what's going on with you personally. For example, on Monday, I sent out a check-in letter to all my students and parents, just asking them how they're holding up, how they're doing. And I also put a little note in there about myself. For example, I said, while this is all going on, it's important to stay busy and active. And I let them know that my dad and I are in the process of building my daughter a playhouse. So it just gives them insight into like, hey, he's going through the same things. He's trying to deal with it. And I actually had a couple parents email me back and ask me like, oh, how's the playhouse going, or what, da 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 da. And one actually wanted to see pictures of it, so I sent a mom pictures of the playhouse I was going. I was just like, oh, it's not done yet, but it's in the beginning stage. So just building that relationship and connection with them, really goes a long way, because they understand that we're all human, we're all in this together, and more importantly, that we're there to do whatever we can to support their children in this time.
Exactly. We are all in this together. And I hope when we come out of this that we really understand that power of unity and that we are all in this together. Today's my son's birthday, and he turned 8 years old today. And we had old-fashioned cards that were sent from the family from all over. He had a virtual birthday card from his kindergarten teacher. His first grade teacher sent him a card that he opened today, and he got a phone call from his teacher this morning. He got a phone call and a birthday call from his principal, right? That taught him everything that he needed to learn today, in my opinion. And it taught myself and my husband about empathy. And, we can start teaching others about empathy and what this all means to us. When I also think about, and another thing that I love what his principal did, she built a flip grid, and that's a one-way communication tool that we're used to. And the teachers and staff started putting their read alouds on the flip grid. And then she asked families to put their read alouds on the flip grid. And so when we're doing work at home in chunks of time, small chunks of time, we can go on there and he can look at his friends, Jacob's mom reading a book. He can look at his teacher reading a book. He can look at the custodian reading a book, the secretary, all of the staff, and all of the school family. And the last thing I will say is, when we're talking about building relationships in a virtual environment and trying to keep those connections alive and in a good setting. The power of visuals for young children and children who are going through stress is really important. And so when we are able to look at things virtually and in pictures, old-fashioned pictures, pulling up pictures from magazines and using visuals for schedules is really important, because it takes off a neurological load on the child. And so usually we think of using pictures for younger children, but like I said, when we're going through trauma, pictures are good for all ages. And so when you're working with your child at home, if you're connecting with them as a teacher, what kind of visuals can you use to support taking off a neurological load for your child or student?
Yeah, it's funny that, not really funny, but it's interesting that you brought that up, because the other week I created a Padlet for my students. If you're not familiar with it, you can post a bunch of stuff. So I created one that says, "What are you doing to stay busy?" And I posted a picture of me and my daughter on there playing outside. And I encourage other students. So other students started posting their pictures of what they're doing to stay busy. One family owns a property, and the student posted a picture of them working out on the property. Other ones just posted, hey, they're doing virtual game days or game nights with their friends. So it really extend that communication just between myself and the students, but to the other students, and they can get ideas and chat to the other students in the class and post comments like, oh, that sounds fun, or that looks great, and things like that. So yeah, that picture idea really can help in this time. You have visual, because right now most of us are confined to our house or to our yards, but having visual photos and stuff of other people's houses totally gives you a different perspective on what's going on.
So I feel like you're already falling into this question for me, but are there resources that you would recommend to educators or parents around supporting students who are learning remotely? And I know we talked a little bit about Padlet and Flipgrid, but are there others out there that you would recommend?
I'm not gonna give any endorsement for anything specific, because I think people are overwhelmed with a lot of this right now. I'm gonna go back to what I said before. Start with what's familiar to yourself as an educator, to your students, most importantly, to maybe their families, and start with those because they're going to be familiar, and everyone's going to welcome some sense of familiarity right now. And then I'll go back to also what Dina and I were saying with less is more, and don't try to utilize too many or send out too many. I think that's something I've read pretty universally from parents and from home, is that they're getting inundated and they're feeling overwhelmed. So make sure you're trying to be as consistent with possible, with what you've already been using.
Yeah, I would just add to that there are a ton of great free resources out there for parents who may want to work with their children. Just doing a Google search. There are a lot of great resources that include things like worksheets where you can print them out from home on, spelling, grammar, science, math. There's all kinds of free resources out there for people to use. Always a good one, simple one to use would be YouTube. As I said, you can pick almost any topic you need and find a YouTube video to help students engage in learning that way. And as I said before, just to look at Michigan Virtual's website, there are a lot of free resources that are out there for everyone to use, not even just resources for learning, but to actually help parents and educators, find a place to start to begin the education process.
And I'll piggyback on what Ryan and Melissa said. I would think of this as, in my district view, I want to ensure that our families are reminded of the passwords and the platforms we already use, and that their children know how to use. So when we're sending information home, just a reminder, this is how you get on this, on your Google Classroom. This is how you get on this website where it's a prescription for your child, for him or her to get to work on reading or math. So use that. and make sure that you're just connecting with your child's teacher for what they are already using. Also, check your school's website. I know that we'll all be updating our websites frequently on what to do. And when you're overwhelmed with certain things, again, I would say speak to your child's teacher. If you're having difficulty with something, then they were going to connect you either to the principal, the social worker, the counselor that can support specific needs. And just don't become overwhelmed. There are so many resources out there, and there's good ones. I know in Ferndale, our plan is to provide the specific platforms that we already use. And then we have added a few more to support families who are asking for more challenging work. And it can be geared to what your child needs. So again, your teachers are brilliant. Make sure that you're connecting with them. All of the teachers are available throughout this time, and let's lift up their brilliance and just check in with.
And also, I wanted to piggyback off of that real quick. If you are an educator and you are looking for resources and things of that nature, I think it's very important that you try to keep in mind of what the resources your students have at home. Some of them might not have Flash player or video things. And so I would try to keep away from the highly involved technology aspects, because you got to take into consideration, not every student will have access to these things. Some students might just have access to your basic Word document or Pages files. So try to keep it as simple as possible to help your students who may not have all the fancy resources and technology elements to use at their disposal.
Thanks for saying that, Ryan. Real quickly, Stacey, in Ferndale and many, many districts that I have spoken to, we are balancing the use of technology, but we're also sending out packets in the mail for families with specific things that they can do, their child's workbook from school, their closed reader book, their math workbook, and we are going door to door and very carefully putting it on their steps or in their mailboxes, and we'll continue to do that throughout the year to balance what we need. And I heard, and Ryan can way better answer this too, don't put your information in a PDF form for families who are using their phone because it takes a lot of data. Is that true, Ryan?
Yes, and then some phones, it eats up a lot of data when they try to download it. And on top of that, some parents might not have the fanciest new cell phone. So if they have an older model of phone, there's a chance that they won't even be able to open it on their phone.
Thank you so much. Those are wonderful tips. My final question has to do with teacher self-care. So during this time when we all have so much going on, what would you say to educators in terms of self-care and just kind of balancing the things that are going on right now?
Well, I think it takes a lot of modeling. So I think if even if it's something that you're practicing, we're going to urge you to do that, because it's going to model for your own kids at home, for your students, for your families. I think it's really important that if it's not a regular practice, that it becomes one soon. And much like we were just talking about with the educational resources, there are a lot of resources because it is such an important topic. And so whether it's a gratitude journal, Yale's happiness course is free right now. The book Onward by Elena Aguilar is really great, talking about dispositions and habits, as educators, even not in this crisis. And so a lot of baths and walks, getting outside, and just I think I mentioned earlier, just showing yourself a lot of grace, but making it a priority, because a lot of people around you need to see you doing that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Melissa. And I was thinking that the same. You got to take care of yourself first before you can provide assistance to your students. But most of us have families as well, and it's important that we maintain mentally healthy in this time as well, so we can serve not only our students or our kids. And similar to what Melissa said, take care of yourself, whether you have a bike, go for a bike ride, or even if you have a late night movie night when the kids are asleep, if you have kids, take some time for yourself to just unwind and take a deep breath and take care of yourself as best you can to be able to support your students and your family.
And I started with this earlier about composure as the adult, but when we're composed as adults, it helps us access the higher centers of our brain. And right now, as adults and educators, I mean, we sometimes might have to loan our prefrontal lobe to somebody else. I know that sounds silly, but just think about that. What I'm sharing, my positive intent, I might need to loan that to somebody else. And like Melissa said, educators, we are very hard on ourselves and we want to make sure everyone is okay. And sometimes we need to remind ourselves that self-care isn't selfish, right? As a mom and as an educator, that's really hard for us to do. So let's remember that. And if you don't understand or haven't really looked into what compassion fatigue is as an educator, I ask you to do that now. Interesting enough, right before this all happened, on election day, we had a Schools of Engagement conference in Ferndale, and the whole day was focused on educator self-care and learning about compassion fatigue. And the amount of positive thoughts that came from our staff to give them that day. We ended the day with them getting to select to go to yoga, go to mindfulness, go to learn how to cook, go walk on the track, go for a jog with a group. They loved that. And I think that was a gift that we gave ourselves before this happened. And remember, like, the background music in your head is kind of the words that will come out. So I think that's important. And as a parent and educator, these are the words of Becky Bailey, but a dysregulated adult equals a dysregulated child. So the more regulated you are by doing self-care, the more support you will be able to give to others.
Well, those are great recommendations, and I would like to thank you all for joining me today. I have to say, I feel like I've learned so much. I've been taking notes while also moderating. So I'm going to try some of those tips and tricks here at home. Just a reminder to our audience that we have a number of resources listed on the Michigan Virtual website, and you can find them all here. And if you have any questions, you can address them to me on Twitter at Stacey_edu, or you can email me at staceyschuh@michiganvirtual.org. And I would be happy to pass on any questions you have for our panel as well. So again, thank you to all of you for joining us today, and we will see you next time. Stay safe, everybody.